Welcome friends. Hope you are doing well. I am here to discuss with you the first chapter of Unit 1, that is, the living world. If you are new to my channel, please hit the like button and do subscribe to my channel. So, let's begin. Now, what is living? Biology is the science of life forms and living processes. It is derived from the Greek words bios, which means life, and logos, which means study. Biologists study the structure, function, growth, origin, evolution, and distribution of living organisms. Any organism or a living form that possesses or shows the characteristics of life or being alive. Summing up the things are constantly evolving, self-replicating, self-regulating, interactive complex systems that are capable of responding to an external stimulus is called life. So, what is that life defines? How can we tell that one thing is alive or another is not? Most people have an understanding of what it means for something to be alive. However, it is surprisingly hard to come up with a precise definition of life. To make this separation, we must come up with a list of properties that, as a group, uniquely characteristics of living organisms. Living things are made up of cells and are capable of carrying out various cellular activities. The different features that best describe what a living thing is are as mentioned below. First of all, the growth, reproduction, then metabolism, homeostasis, cellular organization, respond to external stimuli, consciousness, locomotion, and movement. Now, the growth. Living things tend to grow in size, and growth refers to increase in mass and number of individual organisms. Living things grow due to cell division. Growth varies in plants and animals. Scientists use growth and development as a measure of life. Now, humans visibly grow up to a certain age, but the cells keep on dividing, and thus new cells in the body keep on replacing the old ones. Some of the non-livings also seem to grow in size due to the accumulation of particles, for example, mountains. The growth of a mountain is also a growth in size. So, living things grow due to the cell division. But here we can conclude that growth is not a defining factor. Reproduction. It is a process by which an organism produces an individual like its own kind in order to continue the progeny of the species. Only living things can produce offspring similar to themselves. Shrimps lay eggs that hatch and develop into shrimps. Bluebirds lay eggs and that eventually produce bluebirds. Horse gives rise to horses. Apple seeds grow into apple plants, and mango seeds become mango trees. It is a basic law of biology that only life can produce life, and like produces alike. Reproduction is the process whereby all living organisms produces offspring. Reproduction is an essential feature by which living organisms reproduce of its own kind, and it is a process which is used to produce of its own kind of organism. The organisms must be able to reproduce themselves because they have a limited lifespan. After most organisms are formed, they grow through a period of rapid growth. Then they eventually reach a stage which is called a maturity, and after that the size usually ceases. But maintenance and repair may continue. Then they enter a period of decline in which the maintenance and repair of worn out and damaged materials are no longer fast enough to keep the organism in a stable state, and then they die. Reproduce can be primarily of two types. One is sexual reproduction and another is asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction involves two parents and the fusion of gamete, haploid sex cells from each parent. Sexual reproduction produces offspring that are generally unique and increases genetic variation within a species. Then, asexual reproduction involves only one parent. It occurs without a fusion of gametes and produces offspring that are genetically identical to the parent. Most of the times, the offspring produces similar features as that of the parents. Asexual reproduction is used by the lower organism for division or reproduction by asexual means. For example, fungi undergo asexual reproduction to multiply and divide by the production of asexual spores. Hydra reproduces by budding, or flatworms, planaria, undergo regeneration from a fragmented part to regenerate the lost part of the body and form an entirely new organism. Similarly, for unicellular organisms like bacteria, amoeba, etc., reproduction and growth are synonymous to each other. Reproduction generally refers to the sexual reproduction only. Most of the mammals, like humans, produce by sexual reproduction. But when we consider to the unicellular organisms like bacteria, growth and reproduction becomes ambiguous as both results from division of the cell. Thus, the reproduction again cannot be considered as a typical characteristic of a living thing. Hence, all organisms must have the ability to reproduce. Living things may make the more organisms like themselves. Whether the organism is a rabbit or a tree or a bacterium, life will create more life. If a species cannot create the next generation, the species will go for extinct. Then, what is metabolism? Metabolism comprises of all the chemical reaction going inside our body, or a cell, or a living cell. Thus, it is a typical characteristic of a living things. Non-living things do not show any metabolism at all. The chemicals form the basis of each living organism, and these chemicals belong to the different size, functions, classes that are constantly changing and converting to form other biomolecules. As we know, the biomolecules includes the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and etc. The sum total of chemical reactions involved in the biological process is collectively termed as metabolism. It falls into primarily two categories: anabolism, which is a constructive or building up phase. It includes assimilation or building of protoplasm from simple compounds and elements that were obtained as a result of ingestion and digestion. It also includes the process called the photosynthesis. Next is the catabolism, which is a destructive or breaking down phase. It involves the release of energy or ATP by breaking down of food materials through respiration. Numerous metabolic reactions occur simultaneously in a living thing, irrespective of plants, animals, and microorganisms. However, non-living things do not exhibit such metabolism. If a reaction occurs outside a body of an organism, then the organism is neither living nor non-living. Thus, this indicates the metabolism is the defining characteristics of living organisms. Therefore, the cellular organization of any organism is a defining feature of every life form. Homeostasis. Homeostasis is mainly understood as in order to function properly, cells need to have appropriate conditions such as proper temperature, pH, and appropriate concentration of diverse chemicals. These conditions may, however, change from one moment to the next. Organisms are able to maintain internal conditions within a narrow range almost constantly, despite environmental changes, through homeostasis. Literally, it is a steady state and the ability of an organism to maintain the constant internal conditions. For example, an organism needs to regulate body temperature through a process known as thermoregulation. Organisms that live in cold countries, such as polar bear, have a body structure that helps them to withstand low temperature and conserve the body heat. Structures that aid this type of insulation include fur, feathers, then bubbler and fat. Then hot climates, organisms have methods such as perspiration in living humans or panting in dogs, and that helps them to shed excess body heat. Summing up, the living organisms regulate the internal environment to maintain the relatively narrow conditions needed for cell function. For example, your body temperature needs to be kept relatively close to 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius degrees. This maintenance of stable internal environment, even in the face of changing external environment, is called homeostasis. Now, coming to the cellular organization. All living things are made up of cells, and some of them have only one cell, others have millions of cells, and some cells are very simple and other cells are very complex. However, from bacteria to amoebas to humans to trees, the cell is the basic unit in which substances are organized to produce a living thing. Organisms are typically made up of cells. They follow an organization of cells followed by tissues, which forms organs and in turn again combine to form the organ system. The organ system together form an organism. This kind of cellular organization is absent in non-living things. Few examples are as follows, such as the nerve cells, the muscles, the tissues, etc. Living things are highly organized, meaning that they are specialized, coordinated parts. They have coordinated parts. All living things are made up of one or more cells as described earlier, and which is considered as the fundamental units of life. Even the unicellular organisms are complex. Inside each cell, atoms are made up of molecules, which are biomolecules, which make up the cell organelles and structures. In multicellular organisms, similar cells form tissues. Tissues in turn collaborate to create organs, that is, the body structures with a distinct function. And organs work together to form organ systems. Multicellular organisms such as humans are made up of many cells. The cells in the multicellular organisms may be specialized to do different jobs and are organized into tissues such as connective tissue, epithelial tissue, muscle and nervous system and nervous tissue. Tissues that make up of organs such as heart or lungs, which carry out specific functions needed by the organisms as a whole. The living things also respond to the external stimuli, which is known as coordination. Response to stimuli must be coordinated if they are to be effective. Even simple organisms have many parts, and each part must do the right thing at the right time if the proper response is to be carried out. For example, when you call a dog to super stimuli which will be received by one or more of the eyes, ears or nose, the responses to the stimuli must be coordinated within the dog before it can respond properly. Some muscles must contract, some muscles must relax, digestive juices must be secreted. A system of nerves and a system of chemical regulators called hormones coordinates these responses in the dog and many other animals. In plants, only hormones are involved in coordination of responses. Living organisms show irritability, meaning that they respond to internal stimuli. For instance, people pull their hand away fast from a flame, and many plants turn towards sun, and unicellular organisms may migrate toward the source of nutrients or away from the non-oxidous chemicals. The consciousness. It is a property by which an organism reacts to an external stimuli and or change in the environment. It is a typical property of living organisms. They have the ability to sense any change in the environment. The living organisms have a tendency to respond to external stimuli such as heat, light, and chemicals, and sometimes even to the other organisms. This characteristic of living organism is essential for the survival of the living things. For example, if we consider food as an external stimuli, then the animal will respond to it accordingly to take up the food for the animal survival. Survival of any organism requires nutrition. Hence, the presence of food make an organism respond to it accordingly. Thus, all organisms are aware of their environment, but human beings are aware of themselves, as human beings have self-consciousness. Thus, consciousness is also an important defining property of living beings. However, it is very complicated to define living in case of human beings. For example, there are people who are in coma and they do not respond to external stimuli. They function only the heart and lungs and replaced by the machines. So, are they living or non-living? Thus, defining living in human is very much complex. Another important feature is locomotion and movement. What is movement? One of the most obvious characteristics of living things is the movement. Most animals show obvious signs of movement when they are alive, except some plants. Although movement in plants is not obvious, it does occur. The movement can be very slow, such as opening of buds on a tree, or the turning of leaves of a plant toward the sun. In contrast, the tiny sundew of northern bogs and the Venus flytrap of Carolinian bogs show much more rapid motion. One of the most interesting examples of motion in plants are shown by Mimosa pudica, commonly called the sensitive plant. If the plant is touched, its leaves quite quickly folds up. You know the touch me not plant. Many animals and plants and microscopic organisms show few and no outward signs of movement. Yet, under the microscope, you can see the cell contents of the organisms are in continuous motion. This proves that in another way, all living things show movement. And what is locomotion? Some organisms show a special type of movement called the locomotion. Locomotion is the movement of an organism from one place to another. Most animals can carry out locomotion, but very few plants can. Remember that both movement and locomotion in a biological sense must be initiated or caused by an organism itself. Locomotion does not occur when the wind blows a plant from one place to another, nor does movement occur when the wind moves the branches of a tree. Other characteristics include the following, such as the need for energy, maintenance and repair, variation and adaptation, and regulation. Maintenance and repair includes the most living things live long after growth appears to have stopped. Yet, in one sense, they continue to grow as long as they are alive. They may not grow any larger, but they must continually maintain and repair the materials of which they are made. For example, skin cells of our body wear away and must be replaced by the new ones. A cut on your finger heals because new tissues are produced to cover the cut. Some organisms such as salamander, house lizard, and crayfish can even grow new limbs or tail to replace lost ones by recognizing the old and adding a new material. Living things use a great deal of energy in maintenance and repair of worn out and damaged parts. This is the characteristic of a living being. And the need for energy, all living things require a lot of energy, continuous supply of energy from the sun to support their most obvious characteristics such as movement, growth, and reproduction. Almost all the energy used by the originally comes from the sun, as told earlier. The green plants through photosynthesis store some of the sun's energy in compounds such as glucose. These plants through respiration then burn or break down the glucose. After that, they release the energy which is used to support their life processes. The animals get their supply for energy by eating the plants or by eating other animals that have eaten the plants. By doing this, they obtain glucose and other compounds which they too break down through respiration to release the energy to support the life processes. Now, the variation, the changes as a result of characteristic is called the variation. Offspring always differ in some ways from one another and from their parents. These differences are called variations. This is a simple thing. Most variations do not affect the organism's chances of survival. However, now and then a variation occurs that does give rise an organism a better chance of surviving in the changing environment. An adaptation is a process by which a certain type of organisms becomes better suited to life in its environment. Keep it in mind that organisms do not change in order to survive in a changing environment. The deer in our example did not grow long legs because they needed them to survive in the deep snow. Organisms do not change to survive. They survive because they change. Regulation, even the smallest organisms are complex and require multiple regulatory mechanisms to coordinate internal functions, respond to stimuli, and cope with the environmental stress. Two examples of internal functions regulated in an organism are nutrient transport and blood flow. Organs, group of tissues working together, that is, perform specific functions such as carrying oxygen throughout the body, removing waste, delivering nutrients to every cell, and cooling the body. Now, I want to discuss some criteria which determines what is a living. A living thing is able to maintain the internal environment of our body. This is known as homeostasis, as described previously. We can conclude the structure of a living thing is highly organized and it should be able to break down or build up nutrients to carry out the metabolic activities. It should have the ability to adapt to changing environmental conditions. It should be able to produce and respond to external stimuli. It should increase in size and mass. What is diversity in the living world? Now coming to the main topic. The biodiversity or biological diversity means the variety of living organisms present on a particular region. There are about 20 lakh organisms known on the earth, which differ from one another in an external form, internal structure, mode of nutrition, habitat, etc. The warm and humid tropical regions of the earth between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn have a rich diversity of life. That is, the plants, animals, and microorganisms, and are called the region of mega biodiversity. India is one of the 12 countries which consist of more than half of the biodiversity of the earth. There is a need to standardize the naming of the living organisms such that the particular organism is known by a small name all over the world. This process is called nomenclature. Naming is only possible when organism is described correctly and we know to what organism its name is attached to. This is called identification. Biologists follow universally accepted principles to provide the scientific names to an organism. And the process is called the binomial nomenclature, which is provided by the Carolus Linnaeus. Each name has two components, which is the generic name and the specific epithet. The generic name starts with a capital letter and species name always starts with a small letter, and both of them are underlined when written in hand or italicized when written in printing form. Now, what is the taxonomy? Taxonomy is the branch of biology that classifies all living things. It was developed by the Swedish botanist Carolus Linnaeus, who lived during the 18th century, and his system of classification is still used today. The Linnaeus invented binomial nomenclature, the system of giving each type organism a genus and a species name. He has also developed a classification system called the taxonomic hierarchy, which today has 8 ranks from general to specific. Classification is a method of arranging organisms into groups or sets on the basis of similarities and differences is called the classification. Systematics is a study related to the branch of biology that deals with the classification and nomenclature. Taxonomy also allows the systematics to study the evolutionary relationship among the organisms, to create the phylogenetic trees such like this, and maintain the origin and the common, and to find out the common ancestor between the species. The taxon is a group of organisms that are classified as a unit, and this can be a specific or general. For example, we could say that humans are a taxon at the species level since they are all the same species, but we could also say that humans all with the other primates are taxon at another order level since they all belong to order primates. Species and orders are both examples of taxonomic ranks, which are relative levels of grouping organisms in a taxonomic hierarchy. The following is a brief understanding under the taxonomic ranks what make up the taxonomic hierarchy. There are It is a taxonomic hierarchy. As you can see, it is a inverted pyramid. First is the domain, then kingdom, then phylum, then class, then order, then genus, then species. Now we are going to describe this in detail. What is a domain? A domain is the highest, most general rank of the organisms or domains at the top level classification, which categorizes life in the most general way. It's even more general than asking whether an organism is a plant or animal. The term domain wasn't used until 1990, over 250 years after Linnaeus developed this classification in 1735. The three domains of life are bacteria, archaea, and eukaryota. The archaea are the single-celled organisms similar to bacteria. Some archaea live in extreme environments, but others live in mild ones. Eukaryota, or every living thing on the earth that is not a bacterium or archaeon, is more closely chosen as the domain archaea than the bacteria. Taxonomic ranks were always capitalized except for species. This allows the people to differentiate between bacteria and other bacteria. Now coming to the kingdom, before domains were introduced, kingdom was the highest taxonomic rank. In the past, the different kingdoms were Animalia, Plantae, Fungi, Protista, Archaea, and Bacteria. However, some of these groupings such as Protista are not very accurate. Protista includes all eukaryotic organisms that are not animals, fungi, or plants. But some of these organisms are not very closely related to each other. There is no set of agreement on the kingdom classification, and some researchers have also abandoned it altogether. Currently, it continues to be revised. The 7 kingdoms of the biology are bacteria, archaea, protozoa, chromista, plantae, fungi, and animalia. It was revised in 2015. Now the phylum. Phylum is the next rank after the kingdom. It is more specific than the kingdom, but less specific than class. There are 35 phyla in the kingdom Animalia, and there are in the plant kingdom it consists of 14, and the fungus kingdom consists of 8 phyla. Other phyla includes the Chordata, Porifera, and Arthropoda, etc. The class was the most general, most rank proposed by the Linnaeus. Phyla were not introduced until the 19th century. There are 108 different classes in the kingdom Animalia, including the Mammalia, mammals, aves, and Reptilia, among many others. The classes of Animalia that Linnaeus proposed are similar to ones used today, but Linnaeus' classes of plants were based on attributes like the arrangement of flowers rather than relatedness. Today's classes of plants are different than the ones Linnaeus used, and the classes were not frequently used in botany. Now coming to the order. Order is more specific than class. Some of Linnaeus orders were still used today, such as Lepidoptera, the order of butterflies and moths. There are between 19 to 26 orders of the Mammalia. 19 to 26 orders of Mammalia. depending on how organisms are classified. Sources differ. Some orders of Mammalia are primates and Chiroptera, etc., and Carnivora. Family in turn is more specific than class, and some families in order of the Carnivora, for example, dogs, wolves, foxes, Felidae, cats, Meptidae, skunks, and Ursidae, bears. There are about 12 total families in the order Carnivora. What is genus? Genus is even more specific than a family. It is the first part of an organism's scientific name using the binomial nomenclature which was introduced by the Linnaeus. Each genus has a family. They also belong to the species, which is the most specific taxonomic classification among them. It is the first part of an organism's scientific name used by the binomial nomenclature and is always italicized. The scientific name for humans is Homo sapiens, which means Homo is the genus name and sapiens is the species name. All other species in the genus Homo are extinct. Some were ancestral to humans, such as Homo erectus. Species is the most specific major taxonomic rank. It is the most and the major taxonomic rank. And the species are sometimes divided into subspecies, but not all subspecies have multiple forms that have different enough to be called subspecies. There are estimated 8.7 million different species organisms on the earth. 8.7, it's a huge amount. But the vast majority have yet to be discovered and categorized. While each genus name is unique, some species can be used for different organisms. For example, Bufo americus is an American toad. The species name is always italicized but never be capitalized. It is the only taxonomic rank that is not capitalized. In some scientific articles where the species name is used many times, it is abbreviated after the first full use by using just the first letter of the genus N and among the full species name. Homo sapiens is abbreviated as suppose H sapiens. Here are some examples. You can see the classification of human is done here. The domain is Eukaryota, the kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Mammalia, order primates, family Hominidae, and Homo sapiens. As you can see, these are italicized, and this is starting with a capital letter and this is starting with a small letter or lowercase. Now coming to some taxonomical aids which are very much common and we also use in various issues, and these are herbarium sheets, botanical gardens, museums, zoological parks, and biological key. Do you know what the keys are? Key is another taxonomical aid used for identification of plants and animals based on the similarities and dissimilarities. The keys are based on the contrasting character, generally in a pair called couplet. It represents the choice made between the two opposite options. This results in acceptance of only one and rejection of the other. This statement in the key is called as a lead. The separate taxonomic key are required for each taxonomic category such as family, genus, and species for identification purposes. Keys are generally analytical in nature. Flora, manuals and monographs and catalogs and some other means of recording description. They also help in correct identification of the species. Flora contains actual account of habitat and distribution of plants of a given area. These provide a good index to the plant species found in the particular area. Manuals which provide useful information for identification of the name of the species in a specific area. Another important feature is monographs contain information on any one taxon. Hope you all enjoyed this video and thanks for watching. Thank you. Bye.